When she yanked the tie from my hair, I assumed it was just another private humiliation. Then the first lock hit the tile exactly as the bright lights of a news van swept across the porch. She spent the next 30 seconds hitting me and hacking at my head with kitchen shears, unaware that my microphone was hot. Tonight, the entire town is finally going to meet the real her on the 6 o'clock news. My name is Marley Prescott, and at 28 years old, I am standing in the center of a kitchen that smells of lemon pledge and latent violence. My face is burning. It is a sharp, stinging heat that radiates from my left cheekbone where her palm connected only seconds ago. But that pain is secondary. The true horror is on the floor. I look down at the beige linoleum tiles, the ones my father paid to have installed 3 summers ago, and I see the wreckage. Clumps of chestnut brown hair are scattered across the floor like debris from a crash site. They are jagged, uneven chunks, some longer than others, severed in a frenzy that had nothing to do with style and everything to do with domination. My stepmother, Janine, is standing by the granite island, her chest heaving beneath a floral blouse that she probably bought specifically for the cameras. She is gasping for air. Her face flushed a blotchy, ugly crimson. In her right hand, she grips the kitchen shears, the heavy-duty ones usually reserved for spatchcocking chickens. The stainless steel blades are still open, catching the overhead recessed lighting, and I can see a few strands of my hair still caught in the hinge, tangled in the metal. She is vibrating with rage, a kind of fury that makes her look less like the church deaconess she pretends to be and more like a cornered animal. She points the shears at me, jabbing the air. She hisses that I am an ungrateful brat, that I have come back here solely to humiliate her, that I'm doing everything in my power to shame this family on television. Her voice is a low, venomous scratch, pitch perfect for keeping the neighbors from hearing, but loud enough to flay the skin off my confidence. She tells me I am selfish. She tells me I am ruining the aesthetic she worked so hard to curate. I shift my gaze to the corner of the room. My father, Greg, is collapsed into his favorite leather armchair. He looks smaller than I remember, diminished. The triple bypass surgery was only a month ago, and it has left him looking gray and hollowed out, like a husk of the man who used to carry me on his shoulders. He is gripping the armrests with white-knuckled desperation, his eyes darting between Janine's weaponized hand and my butchered hair. He opens his mouth, his lips pale and trembling. He stammers out a plea for everyone to just be calm, for us to lower our voices. He sounds terrified, but he does not stand up. He does not yell at her to put down the scissors. He stays seated, paralyzed by a lifetime of learned helplessness, choosing the safety of his chair over the safety of his daughter. Then the atmosphere in the room shatters. It happens all at once. Outside the bay window, a brilliant, blinding white light sweeps across the front yard, cutting through the twilight gloom and illuminating the dust motes dancing in our kitchen. It is the high-beam floodlight of a news van. Through the sheer curtains, I can see the logo emblazoned on the side of the vehicle. Channel 7, Harbor County News. The doorbell rings. It is a cheerful, insistent sound. Ding-dong. A pause, then a confident, professional knock on the solid oak door. Janine freezes. The shears waver in her hand. Her eyes dart to the window, widening in sudden, dawning horror. She realizes that the timeline has collapsed on her. The crew is not late. They are here right now. They are here to film the segment she has been bragging about to her bridge club for a week, the heartwarming puff piece about her stepdaughter, the Civic Award winner, returning home to celebrate with her loving family. I do not look at the door. I look down at my chest. Clipped neatly to the lapel of my blazer is a small, unobtrusive black object. It is a wireless lavalier microphone. The sound engineer had prepped me out by the van 10 minutes ago. Testing levels, making sure the signal was crisp. I look at the battery pack clipped to my belt, and then back to the mic. The tiny LED indicator is glowing a steady, unblinking red. It is live. The realization hits me with the force of a physical blow, followed immediately by a wave of cold, crystalline clarity. The microphone was never turned off. The squelch was open. The receiver in the van, manned by a technician wearing high-fidelity headphones, has captured everything. Every word Janine just spat at me. The wet, distinct crunch of the scissors slicing through my hair, the sound of her palms striking my face, my father's pathetic, whimpering pleas, the silence that followed. It is all there, recorded in high-definition audio, burned onto a digital drive that is currently spinning inside a van parked 20 feet away. I speak to myself, not out loud, but in the quiet theater of my own mind. I realize that this moment, right here, standing in the ruins of my dignity with half a haircut, is the opening scene. This is the cold open. This is the teaser clip that the station will play on loop before the commercial breaks. This is the footage that will make the entire town of Maple Ridge stop chewing their dinner and turn up the volume. Janine is spiraling. She hears the muffled voice of Ryan, the reporter, calling out a friendly greeting from the porch. Panic overrides her anger. She looks at the scissors in her hand as if they are a foreign object, something that magically appeared there to frame her. She scrambles toward the sink, her movements jerky and frantic. She throws the shears into the stainless steel basin with a loud clatter, praying the noise sounds like dishes being washed. She turns on the faucet to wash the evidence away, grabbing a dish towel to wipe her hands, frantically smoothing her hair, adjusting her collar. She is trying to summon the mask. She is trying to pull the Stepmom of the Year costume out of thin air, composing her face into a smile that looks grotesque in its falseness. "Marley, fix your hair," she hisses at me, a desperate command under her breath, her eyes pleading and threatening all at once. "Do not let them see you like this." I do not move to fix anything. I do not reach for a hat. I do not try to hide the jagged ends where my hair used to fall to my waist. Instead, I slowly bend at the waist. My hand reaches out and touches the cool tile. I pick up a long, thick lock of my own brown hair. It feels soft, tragically detached, like a phantom limb. I hold it up, looking at the severed ends. It is physical evidence. It is a receipt for a transaction she didn't know she was making. I straighten my spine. I look at my reflection in the darkened glass of the oven door, but I'm looking through it, staring down the barrel of an imaginary lens, speaking directly to the audience that I know is waiting on the other side of this evening. You are probably watching this unfold and feeling a surge of pity. You see a young woman betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect her. You see a victim of a family that rots from the inside out. You are wondering how a monster like Janine could hide in plain sight for so long. But let me ask you something. Who do you think ensured the news crew arrived at this exact second? I look at the lock of hair in my hand, and then toward the door where the knocking has become more insistent. A small, cold smile touches the corner of my mouth, the only part of me that isn't trembling. I am the one who sent the email to the news director of Channel 7. I sent it exactly 14 days ago. I pitched the story. I coordinated the schedule. I told them that the most authentic footage would be capturing the spontaneous family reunion the moment I walked through the door. I wrote the script for this entire evening. I knew Janine would be stressed. I knew she would be controlling. I knew she would snap under the pressure of trying to be perfect. I just didn't think she would use the scissors. But now that she has, I am not going to hide it. I am going to let the camera see every inch of the damage. I turn toward the door, ready to let the world in. The scissors, the slap, the venom. It was all her choice. But the microphone? That was mine. And tonight, Maple Ridge isn't just watching the news. They are watching a reckoning. Maple Ridge is the sort of Midwestern town where your moral character is publicly audited every Sunday morning based on which pew you occupy at First Lutheran. We sat in the third row on the left, a spot that implied we were devout, but not desperate to be seen by the pastor. To the rest of the congregation, we were the poster family for second chances. My father, Greg, was the tragic widower who had found light again, and Janine was the saint who had stepped in to heal a broken home. I was 8 years old when my mother died, leaving behind a silence in our house that felt heavy enough to break the floorboards. When Janine arrived 2 years later, she did not just move in. She curated an invasion. She brought with her a scent of expensive vanilla perfume, a label maker for the pantry, and Bella. Bella was Janine's daughter from a previous marriage, and she was a creature made of light and spun sugar. She had blonde ringlets that bounced when she walked, and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. From the moment they unpacked their boxes, it was understood by every adult in a 5-mile radius that Bella was special. She was the child people stopped to look at in the grocery store. She was the one old ladies cooed over, telling her she looked just like those little girls in the fabric softener commercials on television. I was not like Bella. I was tall for my age, gangly, with knees that were always skinned and hair the color of wet bark. I was the child who blended into the wood paneling. The abuse in our house was never something you could photograph for a police report. There were no bruises, no locked closets, no missed meals. If you had called Child Protective Services, they would have looked at our full refrigerator and my clean clothes and laughed you off the porch. Janine was too smart for physical violence. Her weapon of choice was erasure. She did not want to hurt me. She simply wanted to edit me out of the frame. I learned my role quickly. I was the family's backstage crew. At every school recital, church potluck, or holiday party, the dynamic was identical. Janine would dress Bella in velvet and lace, spending an hour curling her hair until it was a golden cascade. I would be told to put on something sensible. When we arrived at the event, Janine would hand me her coat. Then she would hand me Bella's coat. Then, inevitably, she would hand me her purse and her phone. "Hold this for a second, sweetie," she would say, her voice sugary loud so the other mothers could hear how affectionate she was. Then she would guide Bella into the center of the room. I would stand against the wall, buried under a pile of wool coats that smelled of winter and mothballs, watching them. People would swarm around them. They would ask Bella to twirl. They would ask Janine how she managed to raise such a talented ballerina while running the PTA. I would stand there, my arms aching from the weight of their belongings, and not a single person would look at me. No one asked if I wanted to be in the picture. I was the coat rack. I was the tripod. I was the blurry figure in the background of every family photo, looking down to make sure I wasn't stepping on Bella's dress. The defining moment of this dynamic happened on my 12th birthday. My father had promised a party. For weeks, I had allowed myself to feel a flicker of anticipation. I wanted a pizza party at the roller rink, or maybe just a gathering in the backyard with burgers. 2 days before the date, Janine announced that she had organized everything. She invited the neighbors, the church deacons, and my dad's business partners. The house was decorated with pink balloons, which I hated, but I tried to be grateful. The living room was packed with people. I was wearing a dress that felt too tight in the shoulders, trying to smile as people handed me generic cards with $5 bills inside. Then, Janine clapped her hands for attention. "Everyone, gather round," she beamed, standing by the fireplace with her arm around Bella. "We have such wonderful news to celebrate today. Our little Bella has just been cast as the lead snowflake in the town's Winter Gala Ballet." The room erupted in applause. My father clapped the loudest, his face beaming with pride. Bella did a little curtsy, soaking in the adoration. "And," Janine continued, signaling for the cake to be brought out, "we thought this was the perfect time to celebrate double blessings." The cake was placed on the table. It was a massive sheet cake from the expensive bakery downtown, in bright, looping pink icing. Across the center, it read, "Congratulations on the lead role, Bella." Down in the bottom right corner, squeezed in with a smaller tube of icing that was a slightly different shade of blue, as if it had been added as an afterthought in the parking lot, were the words, "Happy birthday, Marley." I stared at the cake. I felt a hot, hard lump form in my throat. But I knew the rules. I could not cry. If I cried, I was jealous. If I cried, I was ruining Bella's big moment. Later that night, while I was scraping the leftover cake into the trash because no one had finished the pieces with the blue icing, my father came into the kitchen. He looked tired. He always looked tired when it came to mediating the emotional climate of our house. "Don't be upset, Mar," he said, leaning against the counter. You know how excited your mother gets. She didn't mean to overshadow you. She's not my mother, I said, focusing on the dirty plates. You know what I mean, he sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, Marley, you're different. You're tough. You're independent. Bella. She needs the praise. She needs the attention to bloom. You? You're like a cactus. You can survive on anything. That's a compliment. Honey, you don't need us to water you every day. He thought he was praising my resilience. He didn't realize he was giving himself permission to neglect me. He was framing my abandonment as a superpower, so he wouldn't have to feel guilty about letting his wife push me to the margins. That became the narrative. Marley is strong. Marley can handle it. Marley doesn't mind walking home. And I did walk home, often. Janine never flat out refused to pick me up from school. That would be cruel. Instead, she had accidents. She would get caught up in a conversation at the dance studio with Bella. She would misread the clock. She would think my father was doing it. I would stand on the curb outside the middle school, watching the other cars peel away one by one. I would watch the teachers lock the front doors. I would wait until the sun started to dip below the horizon and the Minnesota chill seeped through my thin jacket, because Janine had also forgotten to buy me a new winter coat that year, claiming my old one was still perfectly fine despite the zipper being broken. When she finally pulled up, 45 minutes late, there was never an apology. "Oh, stop looking so sour," she would say. As I climbed into the back seat, because Bella was sitting in the front passenger seat, controlling the radio. I was busy making sure your sister's costume was perfect for the recital. The world doesn't revolve around your schedule, Marley. We would drive home, and she would talk about the perfect family we were building. She would rehearse anecdotes for the church newsletter, stories about how we baked cookies together or had family game nights. In her stories, I was there, laughing and participating. In reality, during those game nights, I was usually in the kitchen making the popcorn or refilling the drinks while they played in the living room. I became a ghost in my own life. I learned to move silently. I learned that if I did the laundry, folded the towels, and prepped the vegetables for dinner before anyone asked, I could avoid being criticized. I became the housekeeper, the scheduler, the invisible infrastructure that kept their lives running smoothly. I remember one afternoon when I was 16, I was sitting in the waiting area of the high-end salon downtown. Janine and Bella were in the chairs, getting their hair done for the Easter service. I wasn't getting my hair done. Janine had said it was a waste of money since I just wore mine in a ponytail anyway, so I sat with a magazine I wasn't reading, watching them in the mirror. The stylist was fawning over Bella's blonde hair. She was treating it like spun gold, brushing it with gentle, reverent strokes. Janine was directing the process, insisting on expensive treatments to keep it shiny. "It is her crowning glory," Janine said, her voice thick with pride. "A girl's hair is her power." I touched my own hair. It was thick, heavy, and tangled from the wind because I had walked to the salon to meet them. I had a cheap elastic band around my wrist, ready to tie it back the moment I got home so I could scrub the bathroom floor before guests arrived. I looked at Bella's reflection, shining under the salon lights, and then at my own shadowy figure in the background of the mirror. That was the moment I understood the economy of our household. Bella's hair was a crown, a symbol of her status as the protagonist of this show. My hair was a utility. It was something to be contained, controlled, and kept out of the way so I could work. I didn't know then that 12 years later, Janine would use a pair of kitchen shears to try and take even that utility away from me. But looking back, I think I always knew that my hair and my voice were the only things I actually owned, and eventually, she would come for them too. I found my voice in a cardboard box marked for the landfill. I was 14 years old, rummaging through the damp, musty corner of the basement where Janine exiled everything that did not fit her aesthetic. She called it decluttering, but I knew it was an excavation of my history. Tucked behind a broken toaster and a stack of mildewed magazines was a shoebox wrapped in faded masking tape. Inside lay a handheld cassette recorder, the kind with big clunky buttons and a built-in microphone. along with 3 tapes labeled in handwriting I had almost forgotten. I took the treasure to my room, hiding it under my sweater like contraband. I waited until midnight, until the house settled into its creaking silence, before I put on the headphones and pressed play. The tape hissed for a moment, a static sound like rain, and then she was there. My mother, not the silent photograph on my dresser, but a living, breathing presence. She was reading a story, her voice warm and textured, dipping low for the scary parts and lifting high for the happy endings. I lay in the dark, tears streaming into my ears, paralyzed by the sudden resurrection of a love I had been starving for. Then, at the end of the first side, the story stopped, and her tone changed. She must have been recording this just weeks before she got sick, perhaps sensing that she might not be there to say these things later. "Marley," she said, and the sound of my name in her mouth felt like a physical embrace. "If you ever feel like you are disappearing, if you feel small, say it out loud. Your voice is the one thing people cannot take from you, unless you hand it to them. Speak, baby girl, even if your voice shakes." I replayed that segment 10 times. I memorized the cadence of it. That night, I flipped the tape over to the blank side. I pressed the red record button. My thumb trembled. "My name is Marley Prescott," I whispered into the mesh microphone, my voice cracking. "And today, Janine told the neighbors that she treats me like her own flesh and blood, but then she made me sit in the back seat with the groceries so Bella could have the front because she gets carsick. She didn't get carsick. She just wanted to control the radio." It was a small, petty grievance, but saying it out loud shifted something in the atmosphere of my room. The words were out. They had mass. They had weight. They existed outside of my head, recorded on magnetic tape. I was not crazy. I was not imagining the slight. It had happened, and now I had a witness, even if the witness was just a machine. That recorder became my confessional. Every night, I documented the invisible cuts. I described how my father looked at the floor when Janine made snide comments about my grades compared to Bella's. I described the way Janine would kiss Bella on the forehead in the kitchen, a loud, wet sound, and then look at me and offer a tight, closed-mouth smile as she handed me a chore list. I learned to articulate the specific texture of loneliness. I stopped crying into my pillow and started speaking into the mic. I learned that if I could describe the pain, I could control it. By the time I reached my junior year of high school, this nightly ritual had sharpened my ability to observe and narrate. I was still the quiet girl in the back of the classroom, the one who never raised her hand, but my internal monologue was running a marathon. Then came Mrs. Hayes. She was an English teacher with frizzy red hair and a reputation for being formidable. For our midterm, she assigned a presentation with the prompt, "The Unheard." Most students chose topics like endangered animals or historical figures. I stood up, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the podium, and I talked about the people in our own town who existed in the margins. I talked about the janitor who knew everyone's name, but whom no one greeted. I talked about the kids who ate lunch in the library, not because they liked books, but because they had nowhere to sit. I didn't talk about myself, not explicitly, but the emotion in my voice was raw. I wasn't reading from note cards. I was channeling years of midnight recordings. When I finished, the class was dead silent. I thought I had failed. I thought I had been too weird, too intense. Mrs. Hayes kept me after class. I braced myself for a critique. "You have a cadence, Marley," she said, looking at me over the rim of her glasses. "You don't just talk, you broadcast. Have you considered the morning announcements?" The high school radio station was a closet-sized room that smelled of ozone and stale coffee, but to me, it was a sanctuary. Mrs. G. Hayes put me in charge of a 5-minute segment every Tuesday and Thursday morning. It was supposed to be just the cafeteria menu and sports scores. I went off script on my second week. Instead of just reading the basketball scores, I interviewed the student manager who washed the uniforms. Instead of just announcing the play, I described the work of the set designers who stayed until 9 at night painting backdrops. I turned the microphone toward the shadows. Suddenly, People were listening. The Marley segment became a thing. Students would stop in the hallway. Not the popular kids like Bella, but the quiet ones. The art kids, the band geeks, and nod at me. It wasn't popularity. It was solidarity. One morning, I found a plain white envelope slipped under the door of the broadcast booth. There was no name on it. Inside, a handwritten note read, "My stepdad sells my toys when I'm at school. I thought I was the only one who felt like a guest in my own house. Thanks for talking about the invisible stuff." That note changed everything. Until then, I had been using my voice to save myself. Now, I realized my voice could be a life raft for someone else. I wasn't just venting anymore. I was reporting. I was validating. I started taking the recorder everywhere. I practiced my broadcast voice, learning to smooth out the tremors, learning to use pauses for effect. I interviewed myself in the mirror, asking hard questions, refining my answers. I learned that the most powerful thing you can do in an interview is silence, just letting the other person fill the space. My family, of course, remained aggressively unimpressed. One afternoon, I was riding in the back of the minivan. My segment was replaying on the local community access channel, which sometimes picked up the high school feed. My voice filled the car, clear and confident, talking about the need for more funding for the art program. "Oh, listen to that," my father said, chuckling nervously. "You sound so serious, Marley." "It is a cute little hobby," Janine said, reaching for the volume knob. "But let's turn it down. Sweetie, Bella needs to concentrate on her French tapes." She turned the knob. My voice vanished, replaced by a mechanical voice conjugating verbs. I looked out the window, watching the cornfields blur by. A few years ago, that would have crushed me. Now, I just watched the back of her head and analyzed the power dynamic. She turned me off because she was afraid of how much space I was taking up. She reduced it to a hobby because admitting it was a talent would mean admitting I had value independent of her. At the end of the year, the school district held an award ceremony for student media. I had won the Voice of the Future award for my segments. It was a small plaque, plastic and fake gold, but it was mine. I had put the invitation on the fridge 3 weeks in advance. I had reminded my father 2 days before. When my name was called, I walked up to the stage. The auditorium lights were blinding, hot against my face. I looked out into the darkness, shielding my eyes, searching the middle rows where parents usually sat. I looked for my father's gray head. I looked for Janine's perfectly coiffed hair. The seats were empty. They weren't there. Later, they would tell me there was a mix-up with the calendar, or that Bella had a crisis with her costume fitting that simply could not wait. I stood there, holding the plastic plaque, and the principal leaned into the microphone to congratulate me. The applause from the students and the other parents washed over me. It should have been a lonely moment. But as I stood there, I felt the weight of the recorder in my pocket. My mother's recorder. I thought about the kid who wrote me that note. I thought about the janitor who smiled at me that morning. I didn't need Janine to clap. I didn't need my father to stand up. Their silence was not a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of their deficit. I went home that night and went straight to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask them why they missed it. I sat on the edge of my bed, clicked the tape into place, and hit record. "This is Marley Prescott," I said, my voice steady, deep, and devoid of the trembling that used to define me. "Tonight, I learned that you cannot force people to listen, but you can make sure that when you speak, you are speaking for the ones who are actually waiting to hear you." I paused, watching the tape spin, winding the magnetic ribbon from one spool to the other. If they won't listen in this house, I promise the machine, and I promise myself. Then I will find a whole city that will. I clicked stop. I put the tape in the shoebox. I was done asking for permission to be heard. I was ready to turn up the volume. Boston was loud. It was aggressive, fast-paced, and entirely indifferent to whether or not your hair was curled. I loved it immediately. I had secured a full scholarship to East Lake University, a school that sat on the edge of the city like a modern fortress of glass and steel. It was not an Ivy League institution steeped in tradition and ivy. It was a scrappy, forward-thinking hub for civic media and digital storytelling. I got in on the strength of an essay titled "The Kids' Table: Voices That Are Not Invited to Dinner." The admissions officer later told me it was the most polite yet scathing indictment of suburban family dynamics he had ever read. Moving day was a solo operation. My father and Janine had cited financial tightness and Bella's upcoming summer dance intensive as reasons they could not make the drive. They sent me a text message while I was dragging a 50-pound suitcase up 3 flights of stairs to my dorm room. "Proud of you. Remember to save money and don't stay out too late. Love, Dad and Janine." There was no emoji. I sat on my bare mattress, surrounded by cardboard boxes, and looked at the message. It felt like a receipt for a transaction that had been completed years ago. I did not text back. Instead, I went to the orientation ceremony alone. I sat in a sea of parents adjusting their kids' collars and moms crying into tissues. Next to me was an empty folding chair. I took a picture of it with my phone. It was becoming a habit, documenting the negative space where they were supposed to be. But Eastlake did not leave me much time to mourn the absence of a cheering section. The program was intense. It was a baptism by fire into the world of modern journalism. We were not just writing articles. We were building interactive data maps, producing podcasts, and learning how to weaponize information for the public good. I landed a work-study job at the Harborview Civic Media Lab. It was a chaotic, windowless room in the basement of the communications building that smelled permanently of burnt coffee and overheating server racks. It was heaven. My colleagues were a motley crew of coders, activists, and audio geeks who cared more about metadata than social hierarchies. For the first time in my life, I was not the invisible girl in the corner. I was the person who knew how to splice audio tape faster than anyone else. I was the one who could listen to 4 hours of city council meeting recordings and find the exact 30-second clip where the mayor lied about the budget. In my sophomore year, I teamed up with 3 other students to build something we called the Silent Zones Project. The concept was simple. We wanted to create an audio map of the city, but instead of focusing on the tourist traps or the historic landmarks, we focused on the places the city government ignored. We went to the neighborhoods where the trash trucks came 2 days late. We went to the bus stops where the shelters had been broken for 3 years. We interviewed the people standing there. We did not ask them for their life stories. We asked them one question: what is the sound of your problem? We recorded the rattling of windows in apartments next to the unregulated construction sites. We recorded the coughing of children in schools with black mold. We recorded the silence of a community center that had been shut down due to funding cuts. The breakthrough happened in November. We received a tip about a migrant housing complex in the outer district that had been without heat or electricity for 6 days. The landlord was claiming it was a grid issue. The power company said it was a wiring issue. Meanwhile, 40 families were freezing. I took my recorder, a professional digital Zoom H6 now, a significant upgrade from my mother's cassette player, and went to the complex. I did not just interview the tenants. I recorded the environment. I recorded the sound of a toddler shivering, his teeth actually chattering in the dark hallway. I recorded the hollow sound of a fridge being opened to reveal spoiling food. We edited the piece overnight. It was not a long segment, maybe 4 minutes. We uploaded it to the university's public radio stream and tagged every city council member on social media. The effect was electric. The audio of that child's chattering teeth went viral locally. It was a sound you could not ignore. It cut through the bureaucratic noise like a knife. Within 12 hours, the city had deployed emergency generators. Within 24 hours, the landlord was facing a massive fine and the power was back on. I stood in the media lab, watching the news coverage on the monitors, and I felt a surge of adrenaline that was better than any drug. I realized then that a microphone was not just a tool for documentation, it was a crowbar. You could use it to pry open doors that people had locked from the inside. My mentor was Professor Rivera. She was an intimidating woman who wore leather jackets to faculty meetings and had spent 20 years as an investigative data journalist in South America before coming to Boston. She didn't hand out praise. She handed out corrections. One afternoon, she called me into her office. She had listened to the housing complex piece. "You have an ear for the unseen. Prescott," she said, leaning back in her chair and studying me. "Most students want to interview the hero or the villain. You interview the victim, but you don't make them sound pathetic. You make them sound dangerous." "I just let them talk," I said, shrugging. "No, you don't," Rivera countered. "You edit, you frame, you choose which silence to keep and which one to cut. You are angry, Marley. I can hear it in your edits. You are looking for justice in the audio waveforms." She stood up and walked to the window. "I read your file. I know you come from a complicated background. You spent your entire childhood trying to fix the dynamic in your own house, trying to be the perfect, invisible emotional regulator for a family that didn't appreciate you." I stiffened. I didn't like being analyzed. "Relax," she said, turning back to me with a sharp grin. "It is a compliment. It means you have training. You spent 18 years learning how to read a room, how to anticipate a lie, and how to navigate a narcissist. That is useless in a happy family, but in investigative journalism, it is a superpower. You tried to fix your house and failed. Now, try fixing a city. You might actually win this time." That conversation changed the trajectory of my career. I stopped trying to be a general reporter and focused entirely on accountability journalism. By my senior year, the Silent Zones project had grown. It was no longer just a student assignment. It was a recognized civic platform. We were nominated for the Beacon Award for Civic Courage. It was a prestigious regional honor, usually reserved for established journalists, but the committee had made an exception for our student team. The ceremony was going to be televised on a regional network. It was a black-tie event at a hotel ballroom downtown. I called my father a month in advance. "A Beacon Award?" he asked, his voice tinny over the speakerphone. "That sounds fancy. Mar, is there a cash prize?" "No cash, Dad," I said, rolling my eyes at my dorm wall. "But it is a big deal. It is on TV. I have 2 tickets reserved for you and Janine. It would mean a lot if you came." "We will try," he said. "We really will. Janine is just so busy with the church charity auction. But we will see if we can move some things around." For a week, I let myself believe them. I let that small, stupid child inside me think that maybe, if the stage was big enough, if the lights were bright enough, they would finally want to be seen standing next to me. 3 days before the ceremony, the text came. "So sorry. Honey, Bella got a last-minute callback for a commercial in Chicago. We have to drive her down. We know you understand. Break a leg." I stared at the phone. Of course, Bella's potential appearance in a 30-second regional bubbly water commercial outweighed my actual award for civic impact. I went to the ceremony alone. I wore a dress I bought at a thrift store and tailored myself. I sat at a round table with my team, laughing and drinking bad white wine, pretending I didn't care. But then, a runner from the venue tapped me on the shoulder. "Are you Marley Prescott?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "These arrived for you," he said, handing me a massive bouquet of lilies. But the delivery guy was confused. He dropped them off at the sound booth in the back. He thought you were working the event, not attending it. I took the card. "To our hardworking girl. Good luck with the tech stuff. Love, Janine and Dad." I looked at the flowers. They hadn't even bothered to check what the award was for. They assumed that if I was at a media event, I must be in the back, plugging in cables, serving the real stars. They sent the flowers to the help. I laughed. It was a dry hacking sound that startled my teammates. I handed the flowers to the girl sitting next to me. "Here," I said. "I am allergic to lilies." When our names were called, I walked up to the stage. The applause was loud. It was a room full of hundreds of strangers, journalists, politicians, activists, all clapping for the work we had done. The lights were blindingly hot. I took the heavy glass trophy from the presenter, shaking his hand. I looked out into the audience. In the second row, right in the center, were 2 empty seats with white paper signs taped to the back that read, "Reserved." They were the best seats in the house. and they were empty. I stood there, holding the Beacon Award, and I realized that Professor Rivera was right. I couldn't fix the empty chairs. I couldn't fill them. No amount of awards, no amount of success, would ever make Janine and my father sit in them. But as I looked past the empty seats, I saw the faces of the people who were there. My team, my professors, the tenants from the housing complex who had been invited as guests. They were beaming. I leaned into the microphone. My voice didn't shake. The empty chair story had followed me all the way to Boston, but for the first time, I realized I didn't have to look at it. "Thank you," I said, my voice booming through the auditorium speakers, clear and commanding. "This award belongs to the people who refuse to stay quiet in the dark." I walked off stage, and I didn't look back at the second row. I had a city to fix, and I was done waiting for my family to catch up. The call came at 2:18 in the morning. It was not Janine. If my father had died, I doubt Janine would have called me until after the obituary was printed and the funeral flowers were selected to match her living room drapes. It was a night nurse named Sarah from the county hospital. She told me my father had suffered a massive myocardial infarction and was currently in surgery for a triple bypass. My number was listed as the emergency contact in a file that was 10 years old, a digital ghost from a time before Janine had fully scrubbed my presence from the administrative record. I left Boston 20 minutes later. I left a half-finished investigative segment on the editing bay desk. I left a voicemail for my producer saying I had a family emergency, a phrase that felt foreign in my mouth because I wasn't sure I still had a family. I drove the 16 hours straight, fueled by lukewarm gas station coffee and a knot of dread that tightened with every mile marker closer to Maple Ridge. The air in the hospital waiting room was thick with the smell of antiseptic and stale vending machine popcorn. When I walked in, wearing wrinkled travel clothes and smelling of exhaustion, I saw Janine immediately. She was holding court. She stood near the nurses' station, surrounded by 3 women from her prayer circle. She was wearing a pristine pastel cardigan and her makeup was flawless, despite the hour. She was dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, nodding bravely as the women patted her arm. She was playing the role of the stoic wife perfectly. I walked up to her, my boots squeaking on the linoleum. "Janine, is he out of surgery?" She looked at me, and for a split second, her eyes narrowed in annoyance, as if I were a heckler interrupting her monologue. Then the mask slid back into place. "Marley," she sighed, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing to her audience. "We didn't think you would make it. You are so busy with your city life." "Is he alive?" I asked, cutting through the performance. "He is in recovery," she said, turning back to the prayer circle. "The doctor said it was touch and go." I told him, "Doctor, Greg is a fighter. He has a family who needs him. I have been here all night, praying." She hadn't called me. She hadn't sent a text. If the nurse hadn't found that old file, I would still be in Boston, sleeping while my father's chest was cracked open. I spent the next 2 days fighting to be invisible, which was ironically the only way to stay in the room. If I tried to ask the doctors questions, Janine would interrupt, placing a possessive hand on the doctor's arm, steering the conversation back to her burden, her worry, her care plan. I was treated like a distant niece, someone who needed to be managed, not informed. It was in the billing department that the real ground shifted beneath my feet. I went down to the first floor to check on the insurance copays, thinking I could at least help with the administrative load. The billing clerk, a tired woman with reading glasses on a chain, pulled up the file. "I see here that the primary payment method is the Prescott Family Trust," she said, tapping her keyboard. "But we need a secondary authorization for the anesthesia overflow." "The Prescott Family Trust?" I asked. "My father doesn't have a trust. He has a standard joint checking account." "It was established 6 months ago," she said, turning the screen slightly. "It consolidated the assets, the checking, the retirement, and the Mary Ellen Memorial Savings Account." The air left my lungs. The Mary Ellen account was the savings fund my biological mother had started for me. It was small, just a few $1,000s intended for a wedding or a down payment on a house. but it was legally mine. It was supposed to be untouchable until I was 30. "Who authorized the transfer?" I asked, my voice low. "Gregory Prescott," she said, "and Janine Prescott as the co-signer and power of attorney." I looked at the digital signature on the screen. My father's signature was shaky, a tremor in the loop of the G that spoke of weakness and coercion. Janine's signature next to it was bold, sharp, and predatory. She hadn't just taken control, she had liquidated my mother's legacy and poured it into a pot that only she held the ladle for. When they finally released him a week later, I drove them home. Janine insisted on sitting in the back with him to monitor his breathing, leaving me to chauffeur them like a hired driver. Walking into the house felt like walking into a museum dedicated to a girl I didn't know. The living room had been redecorated. The walls were a gallery of Bella. Bella in a tutu, Bella at graduation, Bella winning a local beauty pageant. There were at least 15 framed photos of her. I looked for the photo of me and Dad fishing at Lake Superior, the one that used to sit on the mantel. It was gone. I looked for my college graduation photo. Gone. Later that afternoon, while Janine was napping, exhausted from the performance of caring, I went out to the garage to look for a shovel to clear the walkway. I found my history in a damp cardboard box tucked behind the lawnmower. My photos, my debate trophies, the framed drawing I had made for Dad when I was 10, they were all there, tossed in with the Christmas lights and the broken ornaments. We hadn't just been moved, we had been archived. Inside the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. It wasn't violent, it was a soft, cloying strangulation. Janine controlled the pills. She had a color-coded organizer and she dispensed them to Dad like communion wafers. She hovered over him, fixing his pillows, speaking for him when neighbors dropped by with casseroles. "Greg is just so tired," she would say, blocking the doorway so the neighbors couldn't actually see him. "He needs absolute quiet." But when I tried to sit with him, she would bustle in. "Marley, don't pester him with questions," she would chide, smoothing the blanket aggressively. "Your father's heart is fragile. He doesn't need the stress of your career drama. Why don't you go make us some tea? You are so good at helping out." She was rewriting reality in real time. She was painting me as the stressor, the intruder, the ambitious city girl who didn't understand the delicate nature of recovery. On the third night, I managed to get 5 minutes alone with him. Janine was in the shower. I sat by the recliner where he was sleeping, his face pale and waxy. "Dad," I whispered. He opened his eyes. They looked watery and afraid. "Marley," he rasped. "Dad, I went to the billing department," I said, keeping my voice urgent and low. "The Mary Ellen account. It is gone. It is in the trust now. Janine has full power of attorney over everything. If something happens to you, she controls every cent. We need to amend it. We need to add me as a secondary decision-maker for your medical care." He looked away, staring at the wall where a picture of Bella smiling in a sunflower field hung. "She handles the bills, Mar," he said weakly. "She is good with the numbers. I can't look at all that paperwork right now. My head hurts." "It is not about paperwork. Dad, it is about safety. She erased Mom's account." He flinched. "She didn't erase it. She consolidated it. For the family, she takes good care of me. Marley, look at this house. Look at how clean she keeps everything. Dad, she put my photos in the garage." He closed his eyes. "Don't start a fight, Marley. Please, my chest hurts when you fight. Just let her handle it. She knows what is best." He was choosing the path of least resistance. He was a hostage who had fallen in love with the quiet of his cell. He would rather lose his autonomy than face her anger. I walked out of the living room, feeling a nausea that had nothing to do with the smell of old potpourri. I went into the kitchen to get water. That was when I heard her voice. Janine was on the enclosed back porch. She must have thought I was upstairs. The door was cracked open just an inch. She was on the phone, a glass of white wine in her hand, her voice devoid of the shaky, concerned tremolo she used in the hospital. "Oh, stop worrying. Linda," she said. Her voice was crisp, cold, and utterly satisfied. The surgery actually worked out perfectly for the timeline. The trust is locked in. If his heart gives out next year, or next month, well, it is tragic, of course. But everything is streamlined now. No probate, no messy split with the daughter. She took a sip of wine. I stood frozen in the dark kitchen, my hand gripping the granite counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Yes, Bella will get the studio space she wants, Janine continued. Once the life insurance clears and we sell this place, everything will be nice and tidy. Just me and my girl. We will be set. She laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Marley? Oh, please. She is so busy being a career woman in Boston, she won't even notice the paperwork until it is too late. She thinks she is smart, but she is emotional. I have the power of attorney. Linda, I hold the pen. I backed away slowly. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not with fear, but with a cold, hard realization. This wasn't about being unloved anymore. This wasn't about a stepmother who forgot to pick me up from school or favored her biological child. That was childhood trauma. This was different. This was a long con. She was waiting for him to die. She was managing his decline, isolating him, and stripping the assets so that when his heart finally stopped, she and Bella would walk away with everything my parents had built, and I would be left with nothing but a box of photos in the garage. My father wouldn't save himself. He was too broken, too medicated, too afraid of the noise. I walked up the stairs to the guest room, my old room, now filled with Bella's overflow shoe collection. I closed the door and locked it. I pulled out my phone. I opened the recording app, the one I used for interviews, the one I used to catch corrupt landlords and lying city officials. I looked at the little red microphone icon. I had spent my whole life trying to tell my father the truth, hoping he would believe me over her. I realize now that was a losing strategy. You don't convince a victim they are being victimized by arguing with them. You show them the evidence. You show the world the evidence. If my voice has no value in this house, I whispered to the empty room, then I am going to take it out to the street. I swiped out of the app and opened my email. I started typing a new message. To Ryan Miller, News Director, Channel 7. Harbor County News. Subject, pitch, The Local Hero Returns, a family reunion story. I was about to produce the most important segment of my life. Janine wanted a tidy ending. I was going to give her a messy one. I called Ryan Miller on a Tuesday morning. We had gone to high school together, back when he was the kid who read the morning announcements with too much enthusiasm, and I was the ghost in the back row. Now, he was the weekend anchor for Channel 7, looking for stories that would bump him up to the prime time slot. I pitched him the narrative over coffee at the only diner in Maple Ridge that served espresso. I told him about the Beacon Award. I told him about the Silent Zones project. I framed my return to town not as a rescue mission for a hostage father, but as a heartwarming sabbatical. Local girl makes good in the big city. Returns to nurse her ailing father back to health. It was catnip for local news. It is perfect, Ryan said, tapping his pen against his notepad. It has everything: civic pride, family values, a little bit of emotional weight with your dad's heart condition. We can run it as the lead segment on the 6 o'clock news. There is one condition, I said, leaning in over my cooling coffee. I want the interview to happen at the house, in the kitchen. I want you to capture the family dynamic. It needs to feel real. Ryan, not a studio set. I want people to see where I come from. Ryan nodded enthusiastically. Location shoots are great. Adds texture. We will bring the van around 5 in the afternoon on Thursday. I knew exactly what I was doing. By insisting on the house, I was bringing the camera into Janine's sanctuary. I was turning her fortress into a stage. When I told Janine that Channel 7 was coming to interview me, I expected resistance. I expected her to be suspicious of my motives. Instead, she gasped, her hands flying to her chest in a gesture that was pure theater. Channel 7? She asked, her eyes lighting up. Will it be in high definition? Yes, I said. They are doing a profile on my work, and on the family. She didn't hear profile on my work. She heard family. She immediately went into producer mode. She wasn't afraid of the exposure. She was arrogant enough to believe she could direct it. "We need to move the sofa," she muttered, pacing the living room. "The afternoon light hits the dust on the upholstery. And Greg, we need to get him a new shirt. Something blue. Blue reads trustworthy on camera. And I need to get my hair blown out. Do you think they will want to interview me?" "Of course they will. I am the matriarch." She spent the next 48 hours manicuring reality. She bought fresh lilies, expensive ones, and arranged them in crystal vases that usually gathered dust in the china cabinet. She hid my father's pill organizers in a drawer because sickness looks depressing on television. She scrubbed the baseboards. She forced my father to sit for a haircut in the kitchen, fussing over his thinning gray hair until he looked like a frightened schoolboy. She was constructing a set for a play titled The Perfect American Family, starring Janine Prescott. She had no idea she was actually set dressing a crime scene. Bella drove down from Minneapolis the morning of the shoot. She walked in wearing oversized sunglasses and looking bored, but I knew she wouldn't miss a chance to be on screen. "Just make sure they tag my Instagram handle in the lower third graphic," Bella said, dropping her bag on the pristine floor Janine had just polished. "And tell the cameraman no low angles. My face looks round if they shoot from below." "I will put it in the production notes," I said, keeping my voice flat. They were so consumed with their appearance that they didn't ask a single question about the content of the interview. They didn't ask what I would be saying. They assumed, with the narcissism that had protected them for decades, that I would stick to the script. They assumed I would play the grateful daughter, the side character in their dazzling life, just like I had at every recital and birthday party since I was 8. But I wasn't just the talent today, I was the technician. I had texted Ryan earlier that morning with a specific technical request. "Hey Ryan, since we are shooting in the kitchen and the acoustics are bouncy with all the tile, can we use wireless lavalier mics? I have my own Sennheiser pack I can wear. It makes me feel more comfortable than a boom pole in my face." Ryan had replied instantly, "Sure thing. Professional grade. I will have the sound guy sync to your frequency." This was the key. A boom mic only hears what it is pointed at. A lavalier mic, clipped to your chest, hears everything: your heartbeat, your breath, and the whispers of people standing 2 feet away. More importantly, I knew something about the wireless packs that Janine didn't. Most people assume that a microphone is only live when the red light on the camera is on, but in a news production, the audio feed is often opened minutes before the visual recording starts, so the engineer in the van can check levels, screen for interference, and balance the gain. I pulled up the settings on my own transmitter pack. I adjusted the sensitivity. I wanted it to pick up a pin drop. I sat on the edge of my bed an hour before the crew was set to arrive. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan. "ETA 20 minutes, running a little ahead of schedule." I typed back, "Great, park in the driveway. Don't knock right away. Just get the signal lock. I want you to get some candid audio of the family prep before we start the formal questions. It adds authenticity. Trust me." "You got it," he replied. I put the phone down. My hands were cold. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was wearing a simple navy blazer and a white blouse. I looked professional. I looked credible. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Was I doing the right thing? This wasn't just journalism. This was entrapment. I was inviting a film crew to my house with the specific intention of catching my stepmother in a lie. I was weaponizing my profession against my family. Then I thought about the conversation I had heard on the porch. Once the life insurance clears, everything will be nice and tidy. I thought about my father's trembling signature on the trust documents. I thought about the box of photos rotting in the damp garage. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This was protection. I was simply setting up a security camera in a bank vault that was actively being robbed. If Janine decided to smile and act like a loving mother, the camera would capture that, and I would have a boring fluff piece. I would lose. But I knew Janine. I knew that under the pressure of perfection, the cracks would show. I was banking on her inability to maintain the facade when things went slightly off script. I was not making her a villain. I was just handing her the microphone and letting her introduce herself. The night before, I had driven to a small salon on the edge of town, a place where no one knew who the Prescotts were. I asked for a trim. The stylist, an older woman with kind eyes and purple-streaked hair, combed through my long, brown locks. My hair reached down to the small of my back. It was heavy, thick, and healthy. It was the only part of me that Janine had never managed to control, mostly because she ignored it. "You have beautiful hair, honey," the stylist said, snipping the split ends. "You don't see length like this very often. You must take good care of it." "It is just hair," I said, staring at my reflection. "It is history," she corrected gently. "It takes years to grow something this strong." I looked at the hair in the mirror. It was a shield. It was a curtain I could hide behind. Tomorrow, I would be stepping out from behind it. "Make it look neat," I told her. "I'm going to be on television tomorrow." "Oh, a special occasion," she smiled. "We better make it perfect then." I watched the scissors flash in the mirror. I felt a strange, preemptive phantom pain, as if I knew that this was the last time my hair would be touched with kindness. "Yeah," I whispered. "Make it perfect, because tomorrow, everyone is going to be looking at it." I walked out of the salon into the cool Minnesota night. The wind whipped my hair around my face. I ran my fingers through it, feeling the weight of it one last time. I drove home, parked the car, and walked past the garage where my childhood was boxed up. Inside the house, Janine was yelling at my father because his shoes weren't polished enough. "You are going to ruin the shot. Greg," she screeched. I stood in the hallway, listening. I didn't intervene. I didn't defend him. Not tonight. I went upstairs and checked the battery on my lavalier mic. Fully charged. Let her yell. I thought, let her scream. Tomorrow, she can say whatever she wants. I just have to make sure the world is listening. I was not the victim anymore. I was the producer, and the show was about to start. The kitchen was vibrating with a frequency that only dogs and anxious children can hear. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, exactly 1 hour before the live broadcast was scheduled to begin, and Janine was tearing apart a bouquet of hydrangeas, because the blue was, in her words, aggressive. "I told you I wanted soft pastels, Marley," she snapped, shoving a stalk into the garbage disposal with unnecessary force. "These look cheap. They look like something you buy at a gas station on the way to a funeral. Go check the lighting in the foyer. If there are shadows on my face, I'm going to kill the cameraman." I did not move to check the lighting. I stood by the granite island, my hand resting near the hidden pocket of my blazer where the wireless transmitter was humming against my ribs. I had turned the pack on 10 minutes ago. The little green light was steady. The audio feed was open. Somewhere in the van parked down the street, a sound engineer was currently adjusting his headphones, listening to the ambient noise of a woman unraveling. My father was sitting at the breakfast nook, looking like a prisoner of war who had been forced into a Brooks Brothers suit. His collar was too tight. His skin had the gray, papery texture of old parchment, and his hands were trembling where they rested on the table. "Greg, sit up straight," Janine barked without looking at him. "And remember the script. When they ask about Marley's award, you say, 'We always knew she had a voice. We just had to help her find the right volume.' Do not improvise. You ramble when you improvise." "I am just tired, Janine," my father whispered. "Can I take half a pill, just to settle my stomach?" "Absolutely not," she said, spinning around. "You will look drugged. We need alert. We need vibrant. We need loving family overcoming adversity, not geriatric ward." The back door opened, and Bella breezed in. She was 20 minutes late. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, and she was holding a venti iced coffee. "Sorry I am late," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Traffic was a nightmare, and I had to touch up my contour. Is the crew here? I don't want them getting any B-roll of me until I'm positioned." "They are setting up outside," Janine said, rushing over to smooth Bella's hair. "You look perfect. Just remember, when the camera is on you, look at Marley with adoration. We need to sell the sisterly bond." As long as she doesn't try to hog the interview, Bella said, casting a dismissive glance in my direction. This is a family profile, right? Not just the Marley show. I looked at them. The three of them were arranging themselves like furniture. I was the prop. I was the excuse for their screen time. I was thinking, I said, my voice calm, leveled to register perfectly on the microphone clipped to my lapel. When Ryan asks about who took care of Dad during the recovery, maybe we should tell the truth. Maybe Dad should say that I was the one who drove up from Boston while you were at the spa. Janine. The room went dead silent. Janine froze, her hand hovering over a bowl of wax fruit. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "And maybe," I continued, reaching into my bag, "we should talk about how you funded the renovations on this kitchen." I pulled out the paper. It was a single sheet, a bank statement I had printed out that morning. I slid it across the granite island. It stopped right in front of Janine. "The Mary Ellen Memorial Fund," I read aloud. "My mother's savings, transferred to the Prescott Household Improvement account on the 14th of last month, under Dad's signature, a signature that looks remarkably like yours. Janine." Janine stared at the paper. Her face went from flushed to pale and back to flushed in the span of 3 seconds. She looked at the clock. 50 minutes to airtime. She looked at Bella, whose mouth was hanging open. "You ungrateful little wretch," Janine hissed. "I use that money to keep this roof over your father's head. I manage everything. The bills, the taxes, the doctors. You think you can just waltz in here with your little journalism degree and audit me?" "I am not auditing you," I said. "I am exposing you. Dad didn't sign that transfer. You forged it." "Greg!" Janine whirled on my father. Tell her you authorized it." My father looked at the paper, then at me. He looked terrified. "Marley, please," he stammered. "Don't upset her. Not today. It is all the same money in the end. We are a family." "It is not the same money, Dad," I said, stepping closer. "That was Mom's money, and she stole it to buy new curtains for a TV interview." "Stop it!" Bella shouted, slamming her hand on the counter. "You are ruining everything. Who cares about a few $1,000s? We are about to be on the news. Do you have to be such a buzzkill every single time?" "If you don't put that paper away," Janine said, her voice shaking with a rage she could no longer suppress, "I will have you thrown out of this house before the van pulls into the driveway." "No, you won't," I said, "because if you throw me out, I will stand on the sidewalk and tell Ryan exactly why the local hero isn't welcome in her own home. I am not going to be silent anymore. Janine, not about the money, not about the neglect, not about any of it, even when the camera is rolling." That was the trigger. Janine snapped. The veneer of the pious, patient stepmother evaporated. She lunged across the space between us. It happened so fast I didn't even flinch. Crack. Her palm connected with my cheek. It was a sharp, stinging slap that echoed off the tile walls. My head snapped to the right. My father let out a small, pathetic yelp from his corner, but he didn't move. I stood there, my cheek burning. I turned back to look at her. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at her. "You just hit me," I said quietly. "I will do more than that if you try to humiliate me on my own front lawn." Janine screamed. She was panting, her eyes wild. She looked around for something, anything, to assert her dominance. Her hand landed on the heavy kitchen shears sitting on the counter, next to the mutilated hydrangeas. She grabbed them. "You think you are so special," she sneered, stepping into my personal space. She brandished the scissors. "You think because you won some award you are better than us? You think you can go on TV and look like the golden girl while I look like the villain?" She reached out and grabbed a handful of my hair. "Janine, stop," my father cried out, half rising from his chair. "Shut up, Greg," she screamed back. She looked at me, her eyes glinting with malice. "You are not going on television," she whispered. "Not looking like this. You want to be a victim? Fine. I will make sure you look like one." The sound of the scissors was distinct. Shk, crunch. I felt the tension release near my scalp. A long, heavy lock of brown hair fell past my shoulder and hit the floor. I stood frozen. I was in shock. I couldn't believe she had actually crossed that line. This wasn't just abuse. It was a frantic attempt to maim my image, to make me too ugly to be seen. "There," she said, her breath hot on my face. "Let's see you act high and mighty with a bad haircut." She grabbed another chunk. Snip. Another lock of hair fell. It landed on my boot. My mind was racing, but it wasn't racing with fear. It was racing with technical data. I could feel the battery pack of the microphone warm against my waist. I could hear the faint static hum in my earpiece, the feedback loop that told me the signal was strong. And then I heard it. The sound of a heavy diesel engine idling outside, the crunch of tires on gravel. Janine didn't hear it. She was too busy hacking at the hair on the left side of my head, muttering about how I was a disgrace, how she was going to fix me. Ding dong. The doorbell rang. It was a cheerful, bright sound that cut through the violence like a knife. Janine froze. The scissors were still tangled in my hair. Mid-cut. Through the large bay window at the front of the house, a bright white light suddenly flooded the room. The Channel 7 news van had turned on its exterior floodlights to test the exposure. The beam cut through the sheer curtains, illuminating Janine's face. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. I slowly reached up and pulled my hair free from the scissors. I took a step back. I looked toward the front door. The frosted glass panels were glowing. I could see the silhouette of Ryan standing there, his hand raised to knock again. Behind him, the cameraman had the rig on his shoulder. The tally light, the little red bulb that indicates recording, was on. Ryan wasn't waiting for us to open the door. He was peering through the side pane of the window, his mouth slightly open, staring at the scene in the kitchen. He had seen the slap. He had seen the scissors. And because the audio engineer in the van was doing his job, he had heard every single word. Janine dropped the scissors. They clattered into the sink. She looked at the door, then at me, then at the hair on the floor. Panic washed over her face, replacing the rage. She reached up to smooth her own hair, a reflexive, insane gesture of vanity. "Marley," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Marley, don't open that door." I touched my cheek. It was throbbing. I touched my hair. It was jagged, uneven, destroyed. I looked at Janine. I didn't smile. There was no triumph in this, only a cold, hard finality. "I don't have to open it. Janine," I said, my voice clear and amplified by the technology she didn't understand. "They are already watching." I turned my back on her. I walked toward the door. I didn't try to fix my hair. I didn't wipe the red mark on my face. I walked straight into the bright white light of the news camera, ready to give them the opening shot they would never forget. The air on the front porch felt sharp and cold against my burning cheek, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the kitchen. Ryan had grabbed my arm and pulled me out the front door the moment I stepped into the light, guiding me past the cameraman who was still filming, his lens following my every move like a hungry eye. Ryan looked pale. In all the years I had known him, from high school homeroom to his time covering local fender benders, I had never seen him look so genuinely rattled. He wasn't looking at me like a news director anymore. He was looking at me like a friend who had just witnessed a car crash. "Marley," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we are cutting the feed. I am calling the cops. You are bleeding." I touched my ear. A tiny scratch from where the scissors had grazed the skin was welling with a drop of blood. It was nothing compared to the throbbing on my cheek or the cool breeze hitting the exposed patch of my scalp. "Do not cut the feed," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Calm, detached, professional. It was the voice I used when reporting on other people's tragedies. "Keep the camera rolling, Ryan, but we are changing the story. This isn't a puff piece about a homecoming anymore." "Marley, your stepmother just attacked you with kitchen shears," Ryan hissed, glancing at the window where Janine was pacing frantically. "This is assault." Exactly, I said. And we have it on tape. If you turn those cameras off now, she spins this. She tells the neighbors I had a mental breakdown. She tells the church I attacked her. Keep filming. I need the witness. Before Ryan could answer, blue and red lights washed over the lawn, mixing with the stark white glare of the news van. The neighbors had called the police. Apparently, screaming in the sight of a woman brandishing scissors through a bay window was enough to disrupt the evening peace of Maple Ridge. When the officer, a young man named Deputy Harrison, whom I vaguely recognized from high school, walked up the driveway, the front door flew open. Janine stepped out. She had composed herself with terrifying speed. She had thrown a cashmere shawl over her shoulders to hide her shaking hands, and her face was arranged into a mask of tearful concern. "Oh, thank goodness you are here, officer," she sobbed, clutching the doorframe. "It was just a terrible accident. My stepdaughter. She is under so much stress from her job in the city. She became hysterical. I was just trying to calm her down, and things got out of hand. She was good. She was so good that for a second..." I saw Deputy Harrison hesitate. He looked at the well-dressed woman in the expensive doorway, and then he looked at me, hair jagged, face red, standing next to a news van. The narrative was tilting. She was painting the picture of the unstable, city-worn daughter snapping at her benevolent caretaker. "Is that what happened, ma'am?" the deputy asked me, taking out his notebook. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I simply reached down to my belt and unclipped the battery pack of the Sennheiser transmitter. I held it up like a badge. "Officer," I said, my voice steady enough to carry to the camera microphone a few feet away. "I am a journalist. I am currently wired for sound for a news broadcast. The microphone has been active for the last 45 minutes. It recorded the threat, the slap, and the sound of the scissors. It also recorded the conversation before that, regarding the forgery of financial documents." Janine stopped crying. The color drained from her face so completely that her rouge looked like war paint. She stared at the black box in my hand. She realized that every lie she had just told, and every lie she was planning to tell, was already dead on arrival. "I am willing to turn over the raw audio file as evidence for the assault report I would like to file right now," I added. Janine took a step back, retreating into the shadow of the hallway, but it was too late. The camera had caught the shift, from grieving mother to cornered predator. That evening, the 6 o'clock news on Channel 7 did not begin with the upbeat, trumpet-heavy intro music usually reserved for the Hometown Hero segment. Instead, the screen faded in on a stark, shaky shot of a linoleum floor. A clump of long chestnut hair lay on the beige tiles. There was no music. There was only the sound of heavy breathing and the distinct, metallic snip of scissors cutting through hair. Then, my voice, recorded from the voiceover booth in the news van just 20 minutes prior, played over the image. "We often talk about the American family as a sanctuary," my voice said, clear and haunting. "But this is a story about what happens when the television lights are turned on in a room that was meant to stay dark." The broadcast was devastating. Ryan and his team had edited the footage with brutal efficiency. They showed the clip of me standing on the porch, my hair hacked off, telling the officer about the recording. They played the audio snippet of Janine screaming that I wouldn't dare go on television with a bad haircut. They didn't play the whole argument. Legal had advised against airing the financial accusations until they could be verified. But they played enough. They played the sound of the slap. It cracked like a whip through the living rooms of Maple Ridge. I sat in the back of the news van, watching the broadcast on a small monitor. I had refused to go back inside the house. I had refused to go to a hotel. I needed to see it happen. My phone, which I had turned back on, began to vibrate. Then it began to ping. Then it became a solid block of noise. Social media in a small town is a weapon of mass destruction, and the fuse had just been lit. The Channel 7 Facebook page was exploding. The clip of me on the porch had been shared 300 times in the first 10 minutes. The comments were a chaotic mix of shock, denial, and vindication. "I sit behind Janine in church." One comment read, "She always talks about what a saint she is." I had no idea. There is always two sides to a story. Another wrote, likely one of Janine's bridge club friends. Marley was probably provoking her. You can't trust these edited clips. But then, the other voices started to filter in. The voices of the people I had noticed when I was invisible. I used to live next door to them. A woman named Sarah commented, I remember seeing Marley walking home in the snow in just a hoodie while the mom drove past in a heated SUV. We all saw it. We just didn't say anything. I went to high school with Marley. A guy named Dave wrote, she was the quietest girl in class. She never bothered anyone. If she says it happened, it happened. The floodgates were open. The narrative of the perfect Prescott family was being dismantled in real time, comment by comment. Then came the digital backlash from the one person who cared more about her image than the truth. Bella, who had locked herself in her bedroom the moment the police arrived, decided to take her defense to Twitter. She posted a photo of a black screen with a single crying emoji. I can't believe my own sister would stage a scene like this just for clout. She wrote, she ruined a family moment for 5 minutes of fame. Some people are just toxic. Heartbroken fake news. It was a miscalculation of astronomical proportions. Bella was used to an audience that fawned over her dance recitals and her outfit of the day. She wasn't ready for an audience that had just heard her mother assault someone on live television. The internet turned on her instantly. You were there, a user replied. We heard your voice in the background worrying about your Instagram angles while your sister was getting her hair cut off. Sit down. Imagine worrying about clout when your mom just committed assault. Another said, I watched Bella's follower count drop. It was a petty thing to notice, but after a lifetime of watching her collect adoration like currency, seeing the bank run felt like a small, dark justice. But the most important reaction didn't happen on Facebook. It happened in an email inbox. Around 8 o'clock, Ryan leaned over from the driver's seat of the van. Marley, look at this. It came into the general tip line, but the subject line is Greg Prescott. I leaned forward. It was an anonymous email, sent from a secure Proton Mail account. To Channel 7 News, I am an employee at County General Hospital. I just watched your broadcast. If there is documented evidence of domestic abuse in the Prescott household, the hospital administration needs to know immediately. Mr. Prescott's medical proxy is currently held by his wife. Under hospital policy, if a proxy is involved in abuse against a family member, their authority can be challenged or suspended to protect the patient. Send the link. I stared at the screen. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I had just wanted to stop Janine from hitting me. But the truth, once it is out, has a momentum of its own. By airing the footage, I hadn't just exposed Janine. I had handed the hospital the legal grounds to intervene in my father's care. The safety mechanism I had tried to build with arguments and pleas was now being built by strangers who had seen the news. I finally left the van around 9. I didn't go back into the house. I couldn't. I had a friend from high school, the same girl who had helped me with the radio show years ago, who had messaged me offering her guest room. But before I went to sleep, I went into her bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the bright vanity lights. I looked in the mirror. I looked like a disaster. My left cheek was swollen and bruising, a distinct shade of purple blooming under the skin. My eyes were red-rimmed, but the hair was the wreckage. The left side was hacked short, jagged chunks sticking out at odd angles near my ear. The right side was still long, flowing down to my shoulder in a mocking reminder of what used to be. I looked unbalanced. I looked like a victim. Janine had used the scissors to shame me. She wanted me to hide. She wanted me to wear a hat and hang my head until it grew back. She wanted the haircut to be a mark of her ownership. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own pair of scissors. They were small. Sharp shears I kept in my travel kit for trimming loose threads on clothes. I took a deep breath. My hands were steady. I didn't cry for the hair on the floor. That hair belonged to the girl who stood in the back of the room holding the coats. That hair belonged to the girl who begged for permission to be seen. I lifted the scissors to the long side of my hair. Snip. A long lock fell into the sink. I kept cutting. I worked with the precision I had learned from editing audio tape. I cut away the heavy curtains. I cut away the hiding spots. I leveled the playing field on my own head. 20 minutes later, I put the scissors down. The girl in the mirror looked back at me. Her hair was short, a textured, fierce pixie cut that hugged the shape of her head and emphasized the sharp line of her jaw and the defiant set of her eyes. It wasn't the haircut of a victim. It was the haircut of a woman who had just survived a war and stripped off her heavy armor to run faster. I ran my hand over the short bristles at the nape of my neck. It felt exposed. It felt dangerous. It felt free. If they thought cutting my hair would make me silent, I whispered to the reflection, they chose the wrong weapon. I brushed the fallen hair into the trash can, washed the sink clean, and turned off the light. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The broadcast was just the opening statement. Now, we were going to trial. The days following the broadcast did not feel like a victory lap. They felt like a forensic excavation. I had set up a temporary workspace in the guest room of my friend's house, turning a folding card table into a command center. My laptop was open. My phone was plugged into a charger that could barely keep up with the battery drain, and the notifications were relentless. But the tone of the messages had shifted. In the first few hours, it had been shock and pity. By day 3, it was evidence. Ryan came over on Wednesday morning with 2 coffees and a stack of printed emails from the station's secure tip line. He looked tired but electrified. The look of a journalist who knows he has caught the tail of a tiger and just needs to figure out how to pull the rest of the beast out of the jungle. "It is not just you. Marley," Ryan said, dropping the papers on the table. "We have 3 different sources claiming they knew Janine when she lived in Wisconsin 10 years ago. Apparently, her first husband didn't just die of natural causes. He died broke, and his children from a previous marriage are saying she coerced them into signing away their inheritance rights while they were grieving." I picked up the top sheet. The subject line read, "The Pattern." "We are not doing a follow-up segment," Ryan said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "We are doing a series. We are calling it Behind Closed Doors, The Economics of Control. And I want you to co-produce it. You are not just the victim anymore. You are the investigator." I accepted the job on the spot. I started with the public records. Janine had always prided herself on her charitable work, specifically a fund she managed called the Maple Ridge Angels Fund, which was theoretically designed to help local orphans pay for school supplies. It was run through the church, giving it a veneer of sanctity. I pulled the tax filings for the last 3 years. On the surface, it looked clean, but when I cross-referenced the expenditures, I found a recurring payment to a consulting firm registered as Prima Bella LLC. I ran a search on the LLC. The registered agent was a lawyer in a strip mall 2 towns over, but the mailing address was a PO box that I recognized. It was the same PO box Janine used for her antique resale side business that never actually sold any antiques. I did the math. Over 3 years, 40% of the donations to the Angels Fund, money given by little old ladies in the congregation, had been funneled into Prima Bella LLC. And where does that money go? I asked myself aloud, typing the numbers into a spreadsheet. I hacked into nothing. I simply looked at Bella's social media. I scrolled back 2 years. New custom costumes. Thank you. Mom. Summer intensive in New York. Paid in full. New car for my Sweet 16. The dates of the major purchases aligned perfectly with the withdrawal dates from the charity fund. Janine wasn't just stealing. She was laundering the goodwill of the church to fund her daughter's delusions of stardom. Then I turned back to my own case. I pulled up the digital copy of the bank transfer that had moved my mother's savings into the joint trust. I zoomed in on my father's signature. It was a mess of ink. The loops were jagged. The pressure was uneven, fading in and out as if the hand holding the pen could barely maintain a grip. I checked the timestamp on the bank's digital notary log. It was signed on October 14th at 4 p.m. I pulled up my father's medical chart, which I had managed to access through the hospital portal before Janine changed the password. On October 14th at 4 p.m, my father had been administered a high dose of Dilaudid for post-surgical chest pain. He wasn't just weak when he signed that paper. He was legally incapacitated. She put a pen in the hand of a man who couldn't tell the difference between a contract and a napkin. I whispered. The twist came on Thursday afternoon. My phone rang with an unknown number. I usually let those go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Is this Marley Prescott?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded older, her voice raspy with nerves. "This is she?" "My name is Elena Russo. You don't know me, but I was engaged to your father 6 months before he met Janine." I froze. My father had never mentioned an Elena. "We met at a grief support group," Elena continued. "He was sweet. We were happy. Then, suddenly, he broke it off. He said he heard things, terrible things, rumors that I was in debt, that I had a drinking problem. None of it was true, but he wouldn't listen. He said a concerned friend had shown him proof." "Let me guess," I said, my grip on the phone tightening. "The friend was Janine." "She wasn't his friend then," Elena said. "She was just a woman in the choir. But after we broke up, she was there to pick up the pieces. I tried to warn him, but she had already isolated him. She does this. Marley, she identifies a vulnerable host, clears away the competition with lies, and then moves in. I thought you should know it wasn't an accident that she found him." I hung up the phone and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Minnesota winter. This wasn't a love story gone wrong. It was a hostile takeover that had been planned for a decade. We took the evidence to the church, or rather, Ryan did. He cornered Pastor Williams outside the rectory with a camera crew. "Pastor," Ryan asked, microphone extended, "were you aware that the treasurer of the Angels Fund, Janine Prescott, was diverting 40% of donations to a private company owned by her daughter? And did you ignore complaints from other parishioners about her financial bullying because she paid for the new organ?" The pastor's stammering non-denial made the evening news. The image of the perfect family wasn't just cracked. The foundation was rotting, and it was taking the town's institutions down with it. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Can you come over? She is not here. She is meeting with a lawyer." I drove to the house. It looked dark. The stage lights finally turned off. I let myself in with my key, the one Janine had tried to take back 100 times. My father was sitting in the recliner in the dark. The television was on, paused on a freeze frame of the Channel 7 report. It was the image of the hair on the floor. "I watched it," he said. His voice was stronger than it had been in the hospital, but it sounded hollow. "I watched the whole thing. I heard the recording. I stood in the doorway, and I heard her voice," he said softly. "Not the words, the tone. I haven't heard that tone directed at me in a long time. She uses a baby voice with me, but on that tape, she sounded like she hated you. She sounded like she hated us." "She doesn't hate us, Dad," I said, walking over to him. "She consumes us. There is a difference." He looked up at me. He looked at my short, choppy hair. He reached out a trembling hand, but he didn't touch me. He pulled it back. "I signed something," he whispered. "In the hospital. She told me it was a release form for the insurance. She said if I didn't sign it, we would lose the house. I was so groggy. Marley, I just wanted to go back to sleep." "I know, Dad," I said. "We can fix it, but you have to be willing to say that out loud, to a judge." He nodded slowly. It wasn't a hero's nod. It was the nod of a man who finally realizes the burning building isn't going to put itself out. The climax of the week was the town hall meeting on Friday night. It wasn't officially about us. It was a scheduled city council meeting, but Channel 7 broadcast it live because they knew the room would be packed. I stood at the podium during the open comment session. I didn't talk about my hair. I talked about the silence. I talked about how financial abuse is domestic violence. I talked about how coercing a sick person to sign documents is a crime, not a marital dispute. When I finished, I expected polite applause. Instead, a woman in the third row stood up. "My son's wife controls his entire paycheck," she said, her voice shaking. "He has to ask her for lunch money. He is 30 years old." Then a man stood up. My stepfather sold my mother's jewelry while she was in hospice. He said it was for bills. He bought a boat. One by one, they stood up. The perfect town of Maple Ridge was confessing its sins. The shame that Janine had tried to bury me under was evaporating, replaced by a collective rage. I looked at the camera in the back of the room. I wasn't reporting the story anymore. I was the match that had started the fire. As I walked out of the town hall, adrenaline humming in my veins, a man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out of the shadows of a pillar. He wasn't a reporter. He looked too expensive for local news. "Ms. Prescott," he said. He handed me a business card. "Jameson and Associates. Forensic Accounting and Family Law." "I watched your series," he said, "and I have been looking at the public filings you uncovered regarding the charity fund." "Are you representing the church?" I asked defensively. "No," he smiled, a shark-like grin that told me he smelled blood in the water. "I represent a firm that specializes in asset recovery for victims of elder abuse and fraud. You have done excellent investigative work. Marley, you have established the pattern. You have the motive. You have the medical timeline." He looked at my father, who was walking slowly out of the building behind me, leaning on a cane. "We don't just want to get a restraining order," the lawyer said, lowering his voice. "With the evidence of the charity fraud and the forged medical trust, we can file a civil RICO suit. We can freeze her assets by Monday morning. We can force her to pay back every cent she took from your mother's fund, plus damages." He paused, looking at my short hair. "You didn't just expose a bad stepmother," he said. "You exposed a criminal enterprise operating out of a suburban kitchen. Do you want to settle for an apology, or do you want to bankrupt the business?" I looked at the card. I looked at my dad. "I don't want an apology," I said. "I want the receipts." The hearing at the county courthouse was technically a civil proceeding regarding a temporary restraining order and a petition to review a medical power of attorney. However, judging by the satellite trucks parked along the curb and the crowd gathered on the concrete steps, it looked more like the trial of the century. I arrived in Ryan's car. We had to park 2 blocks away to avoid the crush. As we walked toward the entrance, I saw them, strangers holding signs made of poster board and marker. "Silence ends here. Financial abuse is violence. We stand with Marley." For a girl who had spent her entire life looking at empty chairs, the sight of a standing room-only crowd on the courthouse lawn was overwhelming. I touched the nape of my neck where the hair was now shorn close to the skin. The wind felt cold, but the shame was gone. Inside, courtroom 4 was packed. The judge, a stern woman named Honorable Edith Vance, looked over her spectacles at the media circus. She allowed one stationary camera from Channel 7, likely acknowledging that the case had already been tried in the court of public opinion, and transparency was the only way to maintain order. Janine was already seated at the defense table. She was wearing a soft beige suit, the color of innocence. She looked composed, though her hands were gripping a leather notebook so tightly her knuckles were white. Her lawyer, a slick man with a comb-over named Mr. Henderson, was whispering in her ear. When the bailiff called the court to order, Mr. Henderson stood up. He buttoned his jacket and gave the judge a weary smile, the look of a man dealing with hysterical women. "Your Honor," Henderson began, his voice smooth, "this entire circus is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by viral media. My client, Mrs. Prescott, admits there was a heated argument. Emotions ran high. There was a minor physical altercation involving a pair of scissors, which we regret. But let us be clear. This was a private family dispute, not a criminal act. The petitioner, Ms. Prescott, is a media professional who staged this confrontation to boost her own career. She manipulated a stressful situation to create content." Janine nodded demurely, dabbing at a dry eye. She was betting everything on the narrative that I was the villain, the fame-hungry stepdaughter who had tricked her. Then my lawyer, the shark-like Jameson, stood up. "We dispute the characterization of a minor altercation, Your Honor," Jameson said, his voice cutting through the room. "But before we address the assault, we would like to address the motive. Violence in the home is rarely about anger. It is about control. And when that control is threatened, the abuser escalates. Jameson turned toward the gallery. "We call Gregory Prescott to the stand." A ripple of shock went through the room. Janine's head snapped up. She hadn't expected him to be here. She thought he was at home, medicated and pliable. My father walked through the double doors at the back of the room. He was walking slowly, leaning on a cane, but he was walking under his own power. He wasn't wearing the blue shirt Janine liked. He was wearing an old flannel shirt that he used to wear when he went fishing, before she threw it out. I had dug it out of the Goodwill donation bag in the garage that morning. He took the stand. He looked at Janine. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't look away. "Mr. Prescott," Jameson asked, "do you currently feel safe with your wife managing your medical and financial affairs?" "No," my father said. The microphone picked up the rasp in his voice, but the word was solid. "I do not." "And why is that?" "Because I watch the news," my father said, looking at the judge. "And I heard my wife threaten my daughter, and then I looked at my bank records. I did not sign the transfer of the Mary Ellen Memorial Fund. I was asleep. She used my hand like a stamp." Janine gasped audibly. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm to restrain her. "I am hereby revoking Janine Prescott's power of attorney," my father continued, his voice gaining strength. "I am placing all my assets, including the house and the insurance policies, into an irrevocable trust managed by a third-party fiduciary. She cannot sign a check. She cannot sell a single spoon without approval." It was a financial decapitation. I watched Janine's face crumble. The loss of love she could handle. She never really loved him anyway. But the loss of the money? That was the true injury. Jameson wasn't done. "Your Honor, regarding the defense's claim that this was a spontaneous emotional outburst, we would like to enter into evidence Exhibit C. This is an audio recording captured by Ms. Prescott's lavalier microphone 10 minutes prior to the assault." The bailiff played the file. My voice, calm and steady, filled the courtroom, asking about the money. Then Janine's voice, sharp and venomous. "If you do not do what I say, I will make sure you have nothing. I will make sure you are written out of everything. It will be nice and tidy in my hands, and Bella's hands once Greg is gone." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The nice and tidy line hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't the voice of a stressed caregiver. It was the voice of a woman waiting for a funeral. Janine's lawyer stood up, desperate to pivot. "Objection! This recording was made without consent. Ms. Prescott entrapped my client. She came to that house with a production crew. She planned this. She is using this court to finish a story she started." He pointed a finger at me. "She isn't a victim. She is a producer. She orchestrated this entire drama for ratings." I stood up. I didn't wait for Jameson to defend me. I looked at the judge. Then I turned and looked directly into the lens of the Channel 7 camera. "You are right," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the trembling that had defined my childhood. "I am a producer. I did plan this. I sent the email to Ryan Miller 2 weeks ago, and I carbon-copied the senior editor of domestic policy at the national desk. I told them I was going into a volatile situation to document financial and emotional abuse. I didn't stage the violence. Counselor, your client provided that all on her own. I just made sure the lights were on so you could see it." I took a step forward. "I didn't use the media to get revenge. I am the media, and my job is to make the invisible visible. For 20 years, Janine relied on the fact that domestic abuse happens in the dark. She relied on the silence of the dining room. Tonight, we turned on the floodlights." Janine shrank into her chair. She looked small. The perfect mother facade had dissolved, leaving behind only a greedy, violent woman caught in 4K resolution. Judge Vance cleared her throat. She looked at Janine with an expression of profound distaste. "The court grants the permanent restraining order," the judge ruled, banging the gavel. "Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate forensic audit of the Prescott Family Trust and the Church Charity Fund. Based on the testimony regarding the forced signature, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal fraud charges. Mrs. May Prescott, You are to vacate the marital home by noon tomorrow." The gavel strike sounded like a gunshot. It was over. Janine didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply slumped forward, burying her face in her hands, hiding from the camera she had tried so desperately to court just days ago. I walked out of the courtroom 20 minutes later. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the sunlight hit me. It was bright, blindingly so. I stepped out onto the courthouse steps. There were no empty chairs today. Hundreds of people were waiting. When they saw me, a cheer went up. Not a raucous, sports arena cheer, but a deep, swelling roar of solidarity. I saw women crying. I saw men nodding. I saw the faces of the people who had commented on the Facebook posts, the people who had sent emails, the people who had lived in the shadows of their own families. I saw my father standing near the bottom of the steps, leaning on his cane, talking to an old friend he hadn't seen in years. He looked up at me and gave a small, tentative wave. He was free. Ryan was waiting at the bottom of the stairs with a microphone. The camera was live. This was the closing shot. "Marley," Ryan said, stepping forward. "The judge just ordered a criminal investigation. The town is reeling. Do you have anything to say to the people watching this at home? To the people who think what you did was extreme?" I looked at Ryan. Then I looked past him, staring straight into the black glass eye of the camera. The red tally light was glowing. I ran a hand through my short, pixie-cut hair. It felt light. It felt like armor. "There are millions of houses like the one I grew up in," I said. "Houses where the violence doesn't leave bruises. It leaves silence. Houses where people use money and guilt to hold you hostage. They count on your shame. They count on you wanting to protect the family name more than you want to protect yourself." I paused, letting the ambient sound of the city fill the silence. If someone in your life is using a pair of scissors, literal or metaphorical, to cut you down, to edit you, to make you smaller, remember this: there is always a camera. There is always a microphone. There is always someone ready to listen. The only question is, do you dare to step into the light for the first time? The cameraman slowly zoomed in. The frame filled with my face, my short hair, the healing bruise on my cheek, and my eyes, which were finally completely dry. I didn't blink. I held the gaze of the audience, challenging them, inviting them. Then, the screen faded to black. Click. The soft, mechanical sound of a recording button being switched off echoed in the darkness, closing the file on the Prescott family forever. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from your kitchen, your car, or maybe hiding in your room like I used to? Let me know in the comments below so we can share this space together. Please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the like button to help this story reach even more people who might need to hear it.